in a race to the bottom in deregulation until there was an explosion of impropriety, unethical behavior, and bubble. And Shanghai, which will become certainly one of the top 3 financial centers of the world, if not the #1 financial center in the world in future years, shouldn't emulate that. There's no joy in racing to the bottom. And this, I think, is a big problem that we face right now. Our companies are bigger than our governments. Our corporate power is bigger than Washington. And if we're not careful, we end up with rules that are written for short-term convenience that end up wrecking the planet in the longer term. And that's what I was worried about.
Lou Mai wrote recently 14 points for how to improve the urbanization of cities, and one of them was about the developing democracy at the city level. So do you think that democracy helps or hurts, or is irrelevant to this corporate issue?
It's very complicated, actually. I'm a small d Democrat, and I believe in democracy. But I have to say, democracy makes urban planning quite complicated because one landowner can hold up a project for 1 million people. The ability of a city to mobilize its land for infrastructure, for the space that it needs, if you completely open this to a veto of every landowner, you're finished. And so there is in a democracy also eminent domain and other principles that can be used. But I shouldn't want to simplify this issue, and I don't want to also be misunderstood on a very complicated topic. Cities need authority to be able to implement meaningful core infrastructure. They need to be able to make the streets, the power, the mass transit, the land use, the environmental regulation, and authority properly deployed is crucial for urban success. And as democratization is implemented institutionally, it can't empower small groups to prevent what the whole community or the society needs. And ironically, it can get very, very tricky. I don't know what more to say. It's a complicated topic.
That's great. That was a great answer, actually. We're going to move on to Paul. Paul Katz is the president of Kohn, Pedersen, and Fox Associates, which is one of the great architecture firms of the world. It's been working globally, and Paul has been responsible for some of the tallest buildings in the world, and particularly in Asia. So let's talk about density in cities.
Right.
In the cities you're working in, for example, I understand that many of the cities in China have an FAR, that means floor area ratio, of only 1.5 to 3. Just as a comparison, for example, Times Square is probably an FAR of 20 in New York, and some of the tall buildings there are higher. So talk to us about density, and then what you see is the challenges and opportunities for density in cities.
Well, thank you very much. I think you've identified, the key issue on the future planning of cities around the world, and that's density. The key to a great city, I believe, is density, and New York City is the best model of urban design in North America, as maybe Hong Kong is. You showed some slides of Hong Kong is in Asia. The average density in China is in the cities of China is 3. But the density in the inner cities is greater than 3. And in fact, the Chinese cities and the population of Chinese cities are actually 10 times the density of the population in North America. So that if I can share a statistic with you, there are about 150 people per hectare on average in Chinese cities. In other parts of Asia, it's actually higher. That's 3 times that of Europe and 3 times that again of the United States. So density is crucial for the success of all great cities, because from density you get the need for mixed use, and then you inevitably get the walkable compact city. And throughout history, and I think throughout the future, and if we have a future despite Mayor Bloomberg's comments, the walkability is essential. And as Jeffrey mentioned, we don't need cars in New York City. We don't actually even need bicycles in New York City. And I do wonder sometimes with the grid of New York City, which is now 200 years old, designed I think in 1811, and I sometimes wonder how they decided on that particular dimension so that a street would be 60 feet wide. And I think were we lucky or were we unlucky that the street is 60 feet wide, which led to the density? Because had the street been 50 feet wide or 40 feet wide, would cars have been smaller? You know, because the evolution of the motor car was a little bit as well to fit into the streets of New York City. So, so this issue of density and how it translates over hundreds of years is the essential to what we do. And I believe the other thing about density is I don't think one can be too dense. I think well-planned cities can be denser. In fact, in the 20th century, density in most cities went down, not up, and not necessarily for the better.
I think, by the way, the dimension of the block came from the ability to turn a horse-driven cart and make a U-turn.
That's right. But the width of the cart was based on something. So.
That's great.
Yeah. And it also has to do with the number of horses leading.
Exactly.
But anyway, so there's history actually embedded in our cities.
Exactly.
Let's talk more about sustainability. So density, walkability, mass transit are key components of sustainability of cities. What else?
Well, I think once you get those things right, you start finding a solution. The other is really standards, lifestyles, and aesthetics.
Right.
I think the more I think about it, there isn't an engineering solution to our problem. It's a social solution, it's an aesthetic solution. And I take that, I've spent a lot of time in Japan, and sometimes I wonder if all of us took the positive things from Japanese culture, and the whole world sort of lived like that. All the large cities lived with those ideas of recycling, which is inherent in the culture, using minimum of resources, minimizing waste. Whether the demand on our resources that Jeffrey talked about would be reduced. I mean, Japan, if you look at Japan as a sort of energy use per capita, and that's, well, up to recently, I think the second or third largest economy in the world, it's way down. It's not just in the cities, but the whole country at large. So a lot of the solution is not about technology, it's about actually the way we live.
Right.
That's more important. And I think as we become educated and the world becomes educated to the crisis, there will be a lifestyle change. It will be fashionable not to waste. And I think once people understand that, hopefully in this country, young people will not aspire to own motor cars and aspire to live differently. And I think that's already happening, by the way. Then we'll see that change.
So we're actually seeing that there are hard systems, infrastructure systems, more energy efficient buildings that can help us, but there are also behavioral systems.
Exactly.
And the behavioral systems have a cognitive basis and a cultural basis.
Right.
In the design of buildings and cities, are you seeing solutions that are leading towards, I'm going to ask this question two ways, shifting behavior to be both more in the Japanese context, but also are we seeing things, the Chinese today are actually very conservative in their consumption by nature. It's a savings economy. Are you seeing things in building design or the kinds of extravagance of city places that are cueing more extravagant behavior?
Well, you see both, right? I mean, you obviously with the great wealth that's being created in the Chinese cities, and we tend to work in those places that exhibit the power and great fortune of China more than, let's say, the vast sort of hinterland of the cities, or I'd say the sort of outside that center where I think the real challenge is in all the housing and things like that. But I think there is balanced with that, maybe arrogance is too strong a word, a sense of responsibility. And I think the central government in China is really trying to curb that waste, that arrogance, but that's balanced with the sort of natural human instinct of wanting to enjoy life, and I can totally understand that and appreciate that. So we have that tension between what we know is right and what we also would like to get, so that greed and responsibility.